This morning, a news channel announced that Prince Harry would be staying at Buckingham Palace. By lunchtime, the palace said no, he would not. 3 hours. That is how long the biggest royal exclusive of the week survived. Before the institution, it was about publicly shot it down, and in the wreckage of those 3 hours lies everything this series has been telling you for a month. Confirmed, time-stamped, and, for once, undeniable. Because the story of today is not that a door was slammed in Prince Harry's face. The story of today is that we can now watch, almost minute by minute, exactly how that door came to close. And when you see the sequence laid out, you will find that the hand on the door was not the one everybody is blaming. 2 loops before we begin. And this time, both of them are ticking. The first is a single sentence, buried inside the extraordinary official statement issued by Harry's own spokesman this afternoon, a statement written in anger, meant as an accusation, which contains, if you read it slowly, a quiet, complete confession that concedes the palace's entire case. I will read you that sentence, and I will show you the confession hiding inside it. And the second loop is a clock. It is set for 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, London time, when a judge of the High Court hands down the verdict in Harry's marathon case against the publisher of the Daily Mail, 14 counts, years in the making, and I am going to show you why that clock, and not any deadline about linen and staffing, is the real reason there will be no prince sleeping at Buckingham Palace tonight. Everything else is furniture. The clock is the room. Let us reconstruct it properly, hour by hour, because the timeline is the story, and nobody else is going to walk you through it honestly. Start on Friday. That, according to the palace side's account, reported by the Daily Mail's royal editor, was the deadline. The king's offer of a stay at Buckingham Palace, an offer that had stood open, remember, for weeks, required an answer by Friday, because a functioning royal residence does not simply absorb guests. Staffing, hospitality, protection arrangements inside the perimeter, all of it has to be stood up in advance, and Friday was the last day it could be. Friday came, Friday went, no acceptance. Then Saturday, and here the 2 accounts begin to diverge in a way that matters enormously, so track both. The palace side's version, again, through the Mail, is that on Saturday, the Duke actively declined the offer, said no thank you, and then, mere hours later, reversed himself and attempted to accept, by which point officials informed him the stay could not go ahead because the machinery had already been stood down. The Sussex side's version, delivered through the spokesman's statement, is that the Duke spent last week making alternative security arrangements following Ravik's refusal, and that once those arrangements were in place, he was able to formally accept the offer of accommodation for himself over the weekend. Hold that phrase. Over the weekend. It is the sentence I promised you, and we are coming back to it. Then, Monday morning, today, and this is where the machine tore itself apart in public. Harry's team briefed its preferred outlets that the matter was settled, that the Duke had accepted, that he would be staying at Buckingham Palace, citing direct discussions with his father. One channel ran it as a proud exclusive, its royal correspondent visibly delighted, painting the picture live on air. The palace, the focal point of the British monarchy, guarded around the clock by armed officers, as secure a building as exists in the United Kingdom. Harry with, in effect, his own palace, a stone's throw from Clarence's house and his father, freshly refurbished rooms, days before the Invictus Games countdown event in Birmingham. It was, for 3 hours, a lovely story, a son under his father's roof again. And then the palace spoke, and the exclusive died on the same channel that broke it, its own newsreader returning to air to report that palace aides had denied the stay, that the Duke was understood to have missed the deadline, declined, and then changed his mind too late, and that it was now simply too late. Harry's office, the newsreader noted with the straightest of faces, continues to stand by its version. And then, this afternoon, the statement. And I want to give this statement its full weight, because official spokesman statements from this camp are rare, and angry ones are rarer, and this one is angry. It expresses disappointment. It accuses Buckingham Palace of withdrawing the offer at the last moment. It notes that the palace spent last week briefing that the Duke had not accepted the accommodation, that he was meanwhile arranging his own alternative security after Ravek's refusal, and that once those arrangements were in place, he formally accepted over the weekend. And then it fires the shot that turns this from a diary squabble into a constitutional story. It is therefore disappointing, the statement says, that the offer has now been withdrawn, with Tuesday's judgment in the Associated Newspaper's case cited as the reason. And it twists the knife. Buckingham Palace, it notes, has been aware of that judgment date since last Thursday. It is therefore unclear why, having formally accepted the offer, it has now been withdrawn at the last moment. There it all is. The accusation, the timeline, the verdict, named in the open, by his own side for the first time. And now, before we adjudicate any of it, you and I are going to do the thing I promised in the first minute. We are going to read one sentence of that statement again, very slowly, and watch a confession fall out of it. Here's the sentence. The Duke spent last week making alternative security arrangements. Once those arrangements were in place, he was able to formally accept the offer of accommodation for himself over the weekend. Now unpack it, clause by clause, remembering that this is his side's own chosen wording, drafted by professionals, released deliberately. First clause, he spent last week making alternative arrangements, meaning through the entire week in which the palace's Friday deadline was live, he was, by his own account, not answering. Not because the offer was unclear, not because the palace was unreachable, because he was pricing other options. Second clause, once those arrangements were in place, he accepted, meaning the acceptance was conditional all along, not on the offer, but on his own parallel planning. He accepted Buckingham Palace when, and only when, his alternatives were sorted, which is to say, he treated an offer from the King of England to sleep under the most protected roof in the nation the way you or I treat a refundable hotel booking, something to hold in one hand while shopping with the other. And third, the timestamp his own statement volunteers over the weekend. The deadline, per the palace account, was Friday. His own statement says the acceptance came over the weekend. The accusation is that the palace withdrew at the last moment. The confession sitting inside the accusation, in his own spokesman's words, is that the acceptance arrived after the moment had passed. He is not disputing the lateness. He is documenting it. That is loop 1 closed. And notice that I did not need a palace source, a critic, or a single anonymous whisper to close it. The Sussex statement convicts the Sussex timeline all by itself, which has become, if you have followed this series, something of a signature. The leaked file undermined by its own provenance. The privacy deal broken by its own announcement. And now the withdrawal accusation refuted by its own chronology. This operation's most effective opponent, week after week, is its own paperwork. But, and here, I am going to be fairer to Harry than his critics and fairer to the palace than his defenders, because the deadline story, while true, is not the whole truth either, and the whole truth is more interesting. The Mail's account, deadline missed, staffing stood down, nothing personal, is accurate as far as it goes. But it walks conspicuously around the elephant, and the elephant is wearing a wig and holding a gavel. Because Harry's statement, whatever its flaws of chronology, put one true and important thing on the record. The verdict was cited. Somewhere in the communications between the two camps, Tuesday's judgment in the Associated Newspaper's case was given as a reason the palace stay could not happen. His side says so explicitly, and the palace briefing has not denied that element. It has simply preferred to talk about deadlines. So let us do what neither briefing machine wants and put the two halves together. The deadline explains why the palace was entitled to say no. The verdict explains why the palace wanted to, and my honest, clearly labeled red is this. Even in a parallel universe where Harry accepted by Thursday tea time with a handwritten note and a bunch of flowers, that stay was doomed the moment the High Court listed its judgment for the same week because the constitutional mathematics of it simply do not compute. Walk through it with me, because this is the part of the story the quick takes cannot give you, and it is genuinely fascinating. The sovereign is, by centuries of convention, impartial. Not neutral in the mild sense, but structurally, radically impartial. Above politics, above litigation, above every contest between subjects, because the courts are his courts. The justice dispensed in them is dispensed in his name, and the press whose freedom those courts protect is a pillar of the same constitutional order he embodies. Now place tomorrow's event inside that frame. A judgment of the High Court delivered in the king's name in a case brought by the king's own son against one of the country's largest news publishers on 14 counts in a litigation campaign that Harry himself has described as a mission to reform the British press. Whatever that judgment says, it will be one of the biggest media law stories in years. And now imagine, at the moment it lands, that the litigant is resident inside Buckingham Palace. If he wins, even partially, on a single count, the victory lap happens from the sovereign's official residence. A statement, a speech, even a 30-second video with those unmistakable walls behind him, and the image broadcast to the world is the crown celebrating a courtroom win over the press in a judgment issued in the crown's own name. If he loses, the picture is scarcely better, the king's house as the bunker of a defeated campaign against the newspapers. There is no version, none, in which a monarch can host one party to a case on the day his own courts decide it, and every constitutional advisor in that building knew it the instant the judgment date was listed last Thursday. That is why the offer died. The deadline was the mechanism. The verdict was the motive. And the tragedy, if you want to call it that, is that a man who has spent 6 years litigating in the king's courts appears never to have understood that his father is the one person in the kingdom who cannot be seen to have a side. Now, in fairness, one prominent royal journalist pushed back on exactly this logic today, and his objection deserves an honest answer rather than a sneer. Why, he asked, can the son of a monarch not sleep in a room at Buckingham Palace while an independent judge hands down a ruling unconnected to the king? Did Prince William have to move out when he sued publishers over the years? It is a fair jab, and here is the fair answer. William's actions were narrow, specific, and defensive, most famously the case against a French magazine that published intrusive photographs of his wife, a discreet wrong, remedied and closed. What lands tomorrow is a different species of thing entirely. A 14-count judgment in a years-long, openly declared campaign against the British press as an institution, brought by a man who no longer performs any duty for the crown, but retains every ounce of its symbolism. Scale is the difference. A working royal defending his wife's privacy is a subject using his own courts. A non-working royal warring with the entire Fourth Estate from inside the sovereign's house on Judgment Day is the crown appearing to pick a side in a fight it must never enter. The comparison is not apples and oranges. It is an apple and an orchard fire. And if you want to measure how avoidable all of this was, run the counterfactual, the boring version of this week that any competent operation would have executed in its sleep. The offer stands open for weeks. You accept it on Wednesday, quietly, with thanks. You fly commercial into London with no itinerary published, because publishing itineraries is how the last visit collapsed. You do your Invictus engagement in Birmingham, your evening at the Royal Hospital, Chelsea. You spend 2 private nights under the most protected roof in Britain, and somewhere in the middle of it, unannounced, unphotographed, a father and a son drink tea for an hour and the world learns of it months later, if ever. When the verdict lands on Tuesday, your lawyers receive it at court, as lawyers do, and you are nowhere near a palace backdrop, because your advisors, if you had advisors worthy of the name, would have told you in January that Judgment Week and palace residents cannot share a calendar. That version of this week was fully available. Every element of it was offered, scheduled, or standing by. It required only the one resource this operation has never possessed: the willingness to let something happen quietly. Instead, every single decision point, the deadline, the acceptance, the briefing, the statement, was routed through maximum publicity, and maximum publicity, in a week wired to a court judgment, was a lit match carried through a fireworks warehouse. The boring version ends with grandchildren meeting their grandfather. The actual version ends with a spokesman's statement. That distance between the week that was available and the week that happened is the truest measurement of this operation that has ever been taken. Which brings us to the casualties of the morning. And the first of them is the media itself, because today was the clearest demonstration yet of something this series has been circling for weeks. The royal press corps is no longer covering this story. It is being played by it from both ends, and the whipsaw is getting people hurt. Consider the anatomy of the morning's disaster. A correspondent is briefed, presumably in good faith by the Sussex side, that the palace stay is agreed. He runs it as an exclusive, on air, with understandable pride. Exclusives are the currency of the trade. Within 3 hours, palace aides brief the opposite, and his own colleague has to walk it back on the same channel in one of those bulletins that every journalist watches through their fingers. Now, was the correspondent wrong to report what he was told? His fiercest critics say yes, that after a fortnight in which this same camp published an itinerary and shredded it within a day, any seasoned reporter checks with the palace before broadcasting a Sussex claim, and there is force in that. Fool me once, as the saying goes, but I want to give you the more honest and more uncomfortable version. Both briefing machines were telling their own truth. The Sussex side genuinely believed, or wanted it believed, that acceptance over the weekend settled the matter. The palace side genuinely held that the deadline had passed and the machinery was down. The correspondent was not reporting a lie. He was reporting one half of a war live without knowing the other half was already loading. And that is the deeper lesson every royal journalist should take from today. In this story, there is no longer any such thing as a single source truth. There are two operations, each briefing its preferred outlets, each technically accurate within its own chronology, and any reporter who publishes either side unilaterally is not breaking news. He is being fired out of a cannon. The Mail's account omitted the verdict citation. The Sussex statement omitted the missed deadline. The full picture existed only in the space between the briefings, which is, not coincidentally, exactly the space this channel lives in. And place this morning inside the fortnight, because the compounding is the real damage. 1 week ago, remember, an entire itinerary was handed to the press by this same operation, published in good faith across the royal beat, and then walked back into chaos in less than a day, leaving charities unable to plan and reporters looking like fools. Now, 7 days later, the accommodation exclusive has followed the identical arc, briefed, broadcast, and contradicted inside a morning. Twice in 2 weeks, the same pattern, and patterns are what reputations are made of. Because here is how trust actually functions in the information economy, and it functions the same way in a newsroom, a palace, and a Hollywood boardroom. Trust is not a judgment about any single claim. It is a discount rate applied to all future claims. After the first walkback, editors apply a small discount. We had better double check. After the second, the discount becomes structural. Nothing from that camp runs without palace confirmation ever again, which as of today is the openly stated policy of half the royal press corps. And the discount does not stay in journalism. The same fortnight has been watched with professional interest by every studio, publisher, and platform that might ever contemplate another Sussex deal. And what they have seen is an operation that cannot hold a plan for 24 hours, cannot coordinate a simple accommodation booking with its own family, and resolves every internal failure by briefing against its counterparty in public. In any industry on earth, that is the profile of a partner you do not sign. The committee refused them protection weeks ago. This fortnight, something larger and quieter refused them credibility. And unlike protection, credibility has no appeals process. And then there is the diary, because while the accommodation drama consumed the morning, a quieter and far colder story was being placed through a different outlet, and it may matter more than everything else combined. The royal editor of the Daily Mirror, reporting with the kind of authority that signals a sanctioned palace steer, revealed that royal sources are describing the entire Sussex travel drama as, their word, tiresome. That the king has not altered, and will not alter, his plans for a full slate of engagements and private meetings every day, all of next week. That there is irritation at the failure to communicate travel plans or answer the invitation in time, and that it would now be, quote, immensely difficult to arrange a meeting between the king and his son due to the last-minute changes. One insider put the institutional mood in a single sentence. This whole business has become incredibly tiresome, and it remains unresolved less than 24 hours before the Duke is supposed to be arriving. The king takes his public work incredibly seriously, and there will be no last-minute deviations to his plan. Learn to read palace language because it is a dialect all its own, and that briefing is written in its iciest register. Private meetings, every day, all week, is not a schedule, it is a moat. Nothing needs to appear in the court circular for a king's diary to be declared immovably full, and a diary declared immovably full on the eve of a son's arrival is a message that requires no translation, but I will translate it anyway. The reunion, the entire emotional engine of this visit, the grandchildren, the healing, the hoped-for embrace that every briefing from the Sussex side has dangled for a month is, as of tonight, not on the schedule, and the palace wants that known, which is why the steer went out. Now, can a father overrule his own moat? Of course. One phone call from Clarence House and a private meeting happens, diary or no diary, and Harry's camp keeps emphasizing that his communication is directly with his father. Palace machinery be damned. So I will not tell you the door is bolted, but I will tell you what today's choreography says. The institution has moved from accommodating this visit to managing it to now visibly insulating the sovereign from it. In the space of 1 week, and institutions do not insulate their principal from things they expect to go well. Meanwhile, through the deputy royal editor of the Daily Telegraph, an outlet with a direct line to the Sussex operation, came the view from the other side of the Atlantic, and it is worth hearing in full because even filtered through friendly sourcing, it describes a camp in open disarray. The Duke's own schedule, we are told, is not in doubt, but his family's plans are uncertain. This was never meant to be one of his routine solo visits. He was bringing Archie and Lilibet in the fervent hope, the reports phrase, of orchestrating a long-awaited reunion with the king, alongside the public events, the Invictus Countdown on Friday, and an engagement at the Royal Hospital, Chelsea. But the security provision on which the family had pinned their hopes was denied, leaving the Duke, and I am quoting the sympathetic version, remember, in a quandary, repeatedly changing his mind about the best course of action, who to bring, and where to stay. One source claimed he had been promised safe passage in and out of the residence, which never materialized, a claim the palace flatly denies was ever on the table. Alternative private accommodation was, the report says, frantically being researched at the 11th hour. And in the detail that should have led every story that quoted it, the Duke received multiple briefings last week from his private security team outlining his various travel options. And, wait for it, the cost implications of each. The cost implications of each. There it is again, the quiet narrator of this entire series, money, walking through the middle of a sympathetic briefing without anyone apparently noticing what it was carrying. His own side, explaining his indecision to a friendly newspaper, describes a man weighing travel plans against a spreadsheet, security team briefings itemizing what each version of the trip would cost him. And of course they were, because as this series has documented from the beginning, the private protection bill runs to a reported $3 million a year. The commercial reservoirs that once refilled it have largely been drunk, and the entire 6-year war with Ravik has only ever made sense as an attempt to move that line item permanently onto the British taxpayer, who would then fund his protection not just in London, but in Colombia, in Nigeria, in Ukraine, wherever on earth the operation travels, forever, exactly as it works for former prime ministers. Every twist of the past month clicks into place along that single axis. Why the palace suite was not enough? Because free rooms do not delete the bill. Only protected status deletes the bill. Why the file was leaked? To pressure the committee that controls the status? Why the indecision? Because every plan had a different price tag and none of the prices were good? The Telegraph's sources called it a tug of war between heart and head. Look at the itemized cost briefings in their own account and tell me which organ was holding the rope. And the consistency test, the one this series applies every single week, has never returned a cleaner result. The same man for whom London is too uncertain to visit without a state motorcade has traveled recently and voluntarily to an active war zone. He has toured Colombia and Nigeria, countries whose security challenges no one disputes, with his own team and no drama. Mexico, fine. Half of America, fine. The pattern has not changed in 6 years, and it did not change this week. The danger is not a function of geography, it is a function of jurisdiction. It exists precisely and exclusively in the one country whose government controls the prize. And if you take nothing else from this series, take that, because once you see it, no briefing can ever unsee it for you. All of which has poured fuel on an argument that has been building in royal circles for months and reached full volume today. So let us give both sides of it honestly, because it is now a genuine live question. The hardline position, and you will hear it everywhere tonight, runs like this: enough. Harry is no longer a working royal, is constitutionally irrelevant in the phrase of the moment, performs no duty, represents nobody but himself, and yet retains the capacity to drag the crown into every drama he manufactures, every fortnight, forever. The only durable fix, this argument goes, is complete severance. No residences, no accommodations, no channels, no exceptions. Cut the last cables and let the Sussex operation float free to monetize itself without an institution attached. It is a coherent position, and after this fortnight, it is no longer a fringe one. But there is a counter-argument, and it deserves equal air, because it is the one I suspect actually governs Clarence House. Severance is a fantasy of tidiness. You cannot sever blood. The man will still be the king's son the morning after any cutting of cables, still a former working royal with a lifetime of insider knowledge, still the single most reliable content engine in the English-speaking world, and an operation fully severed is an operation with even less to lose, which is a frightening thought if you have read the memoir. The institution's actual strategy, visible in today's choreography, is not severance but containment. Keep one channel open, the father's private line. Freeze everything else. Never reward the pressure, never punish the person, and wait, with the patience of an entity that measures time in centuries, for the operation across the water to exhaust either its funding or its grievances, whichever runs dry first. Severance is emotionally satisfying and strategically illiterate. Containment is agonizing and correct. Today, for the first time, we watched containment executed at full institutional strength, and whatever you feel about it, it worked. And notice what today did for the king himself, because inside the institution, this may be remembered as the more important story. For a month, Charles has absorbed every blow of this campaign in silence. The leaked file, the briefed accusations against his staff, the emotional pressure of grandchildren dangled and withdrawn, all while continuing a full program of public duty through his cancer treatment, out and about again this very morning as if none of it were happening. The caricature of this king, drawn by his critics and, frankly, sometimes by me, is of a conflict-averse man forever appeasing, forever leaving doors ajar that wiser heads would bolt. Today did not fit the caricature. Today, with the full backing of his heir, by every account, the institution said no, cleanly, publicly, and without cruelty. No to the residents once the deadline died. No to a diary rearranged under pressure. No to the sovereign being staged as scenery in a press war. Some will call it cold. I call it the first day in 6 years that the pressure campaign met a wall instead of a cushion. And here is the thing about walls. Once an operation built entirely on the assumption that father will always fold discovers that father, this time, did not fold, every future threat it issues is worth less than the one before. Today may prove to be the day the emotional exchange rate finally collapsed. Now the human ledger, because there is one, and this channel does not pretend otherwise. 2 children, Archie and Lilibet, have not seen their grandfather in 4 years. 4 years in the life of children that young is not a gap, it is most of a childhood. The reporting says September offers a fallback visit, but with less chance of the children coming because school will have begun, which made this week in the sympathetic framing the best chance and prompted all that agonizing. And a grandfather undergoing cancer treatment, by every account responding well, but at an age and in a season of life where nobody pretends time is infinite, has spent this week watching the visit built around his grandchildren dissolve into deadline disputes and legal choreography. Whatever you think of every adult in this story, and I have told you exactly what I think, those three people, the two children, and the old man, are owed better than they got this week. And the adults who owed it to them are not all on one side of the Atlantic, but the itemized cost briefings were only on one side of it. And I will leave that arithmetic with you. There was, briefly, another royal story this week, and the contrast deserves its 30 seconds. While the accommodation war burned through the news cycle, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, released a striking new photograph that had royal watchers swooning, and Prince William turned up, relaxed and laughing, on the podcast hosted by the American football star Travis Kelce, charming an audience of millions who could not care less about deadlines and committees. That is what the working half of this family was doing today. One brother was on the most popular sports podcast in America, making the monarchy look human. The other was issuing statements through a spokesman about linen deadlines. The split screen writes itself now. I barely have to point the camera and understand why that podcast appearance matters more than it looks. Reaching an enormous, young, American audience on their turf, in their format, relaxed and funny, and entirely unguarded, is precisely the market the Sussex operation was supposed to own. The whole California project rested on one premise, that they, not the palace, held the keys to American hearts. Today, while their spokesman fought a linen deadline, the future king casually walked through that market's front door and was handed the room. The monarchy did not need to win America from them. It just needed to show up once, being normal. A word before we close on what actually lands at 2 o'clock tomorrow, because you deserve to walk into that verdict knowing the terrain. The case against the publisher of the Daily Mail is the last and largest of Harry's newspaper wars. 14 counts, alleging unlawful information gathering stretching back many years, part of the wider litigation campaign he has framed, in his own words, as his life's work of reforming the British press. The legal handicappers note real vulnerabilities on both sides. Some of the claims reach so far back that the publisher argues they fall outside the time limits the court can entertain at all, which is why even sympathetic observers expect a mixed result. Some counts falling on limitation grounds, others surviving to judgment, with genuine jeopardy in both directions. For the Mail, an adverse finding on even a handful of counts would be a generational blow to the biggest beast of British journalism. For Harry, a loss, after the fanfare, the costs, and the years, would be the third leg of a devastating tripod. The security case lost, the homecoming collapsed, the press war repelled, all within a single season. And a win, even a partial one, delivers its own poison, because it hands him a triumph he can now celebrate from nowhere more resonant than a hotel suite. The palace backdrop having been withdrawn precisely to deny that image. Tomorrow is the rarest thing in this saga, a genuinely unpredictable day, and whichever way it breaks everything around it. Take stock, finally, of the ironies this single day produced, because they deserve a museum wing of their own. A man who fled Britain citing press intrusion spent the day communicating with his family exclusively through the press. A man suing newspapers for invading his privacy had his accommodation arrangements, his indecision, and his security costs laid out in 3 different newspapers by his own briefers. A man who demanded the world respect his family's privacy issued a public spokesman statement about a private conversation with his father. And a man whose stated dream is to come home was kept out of his family's house, in the end, not by any courtier, any committee, or any conspiracy, but by the calendar of a lawsuit he chose to file. 6 years of blaming institutions, and the week's every wound was catered, prepared, and served by his own operation. Somewhere in all of this, there is a lesson about what happens when a person builds a machine to fight his family and then wonders why the machine keeps fighting his family. And the lesson is that machines do not know when you have changed your mind. So, the final ledger and the loops in order. Loop 1, the sentence. The spokesman's statement, drafted as an accusation of last-minute withdrawal, contains its own refutation. He spent last week arranging alternatives and accepted only once they were in place over the weekend, which is to say, after the Friday deadline. His side does not even dispute existed. The palace did not withdraw an accepted offer. It declined a late one. His own chronology says so. Case closed by the defendant. Loop 2, the clock. 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, London time, the High Court delivers judgment on all 14 counts in the case against the publisher of the Daily Mail, and now you understand why that clock governed everything. The deadline was real, but the verdict was the reason, cited in Harry's own statement, walked around by the palace's briefings, and decisive for a simple constitutional truth. The king cannot host a litigant against the press on the day his own courts rule, because the sovereign can have no side, and a son who does not understand that has not understood the first thing about the crown he keeps invoking. And the resolution underneath both. I told you a month ago that this campaign's most dangerous enemy was its own paperwork, and this week the thesis stopped being analysis and became visible fact in real time on live television. The exclusive was destroyed by the denial. The accusation was undone by its own timeline. The reunion was frozen out by a diary. And the roof, the one thing on offer that was real, warm, and free, the actual room in the actual palace, was lost to a court date that his own lawsuit created. Read that last part again, because it is the perfect, almost unbearable summary of the entire 6 years. Prince Harry could not stay at Buckingham Palace this week because of a judgment in a case that Prince Harry brought. The door was not slammed, the door was open for weeks. He priced it against alternatives until the deadline passed, and then his own litigation made reopening it constitutionally impossible. Nobody in that palace closed the door on Harry. Harry sued the hinges off it. Tomorrow at 2, the clock strikes, and everything changes shape again. Win or lose, on 1 count or 14, the verdict lands while the visit hangs in the air, and I will be live with the full judgment, what it really means, and what it does to the wreckage of this homecoming within the hour. 6 years of litigation, 1 afternoon, and you and I have front row seats. Do not be late.